She glanced around and spotted a sleek black vehicle further down the embankment, its front end crumpled against a tree. The crash must have been violent to leave him in this state. But why was he so adamant about avoiding hospitals? "Listen," she said firmly. "I don't know who you are or what you're running from, but you're hurt. Badly. Let me help you." His grip on her arm tightened, surprising her with its strength. "No police, no hospital," his eyes locked onto hers, pleading. "Trust me." Emily hesitated, torn between his desperation and her own instincts. She knew the dangers of getting involved with strangers, especially one as mysterious as this man. But leaving him here wasn't an option her conscience would allow. "All right," she relented, her voice softening. "But you have to let me at least get you out of the cold." She helped him stand, his weight pressing heavily on her smaller frame. He groaned in pain but didn't protest as she guided him toward the car. Up close, she noticed details that seemed out of place, a watch glinting on his wrist that looked more expensive than her entire wardrobe, shoes that bore no sign of wear, and a faint cologne that hinted at a life far removed from the hardships she knew. As they reached the car, Emily realized just how dire the situation was. The vehicle was barely functional, its engine sputtering when she turned the key. With no other choice, she drove at a crawl toward Clearwater, hoping the town's single clinic would suffice. Throughout the ride, the man drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering fragments of sentences she couldn't piece together. Names, numbers, and something about trust. Each word only deepened the mystery surrounding him. When they reached the clinic, Emily hesitated. His earlier plea echoed in her mind, no hospitals, no police. But what other option did she have? Before she could decide, the man stirred. "Not here," he murmured, his hand weakly gripping her sleeve. "Take me, somewhere safe." Frustration bubbled inside her, but she bit it back. "You're not giving me much to work with, you know. Do you even realize how close you are to dying?" His lips twitched in what might have been a faint smile. "Not the first time." Emily sighed, exasperated. "Fine. My house is close. But if you so much as twitch the wrong way, I'm calling for help." He nodded weakly, the effort seeming to drain the last of his strength. By the time she maneuvered him into her modest home, the storm outside had intensified, rain lashing against the windows. Timmy's curious eyes widened as he took in the sight of the bloodied stranger. "Who's that?" he asked, clutching the edge of the table. "Just someone who needs help," Emily replied, her tone leaving no room for questions. "Go grab the first aid kit, quickly." As Timmy dashed off, Emily helped the man onto the couch. He winced but said nothing, his eyes scanning the room, a humble space filled with mismatched furniture, family photos, and signs of a life lived frugally. "You didn't have to do this," he said, his voice hoarse. Emily arched a brow. "Yeah, well, you didn't give me much of a choice." She began cleaning his wounds, her movements brisk but gentle. "You're lucky you crashed near someone like me. Most people would have left you there." He studied her silently, his gaze heavy with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "Why didn't you?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean? Why did you stop?" he pressed. "You don't know me. I could be anyone." Emily shrugged, focusing on wrapping his arm. "Maybe that's why. You needed help, and I was there. Doesn't mean I trust you, though." His lips curved into a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Fair enough." As the storm raged on outside, Emily worked tirelessly to stabilize him, her thoughts racing. Who was this man, and what had he gotten himself into? Despite his injuries, he carried an air of authority, of someone unaccustomed to relying on others. As the night wore on, he finally drifted into a fitful sleep. Emily watched him for a moment, her exhaustion warring with her curiosity. Something about him didn't add up, and she had a feeling her quiet life was about to become anything but. Little did she know, the decision she'd made that evening, to help a stranger on the side of the road, would set off a chain of events that would change not just her life, but the lives of everyone in Clearwater. The morning light crept through the thin curtains of Emily's small living room, casting soft beams over the battered figure lying on her couch. Emily blinked herself awake, realizing she'd fallen asleep in the armchair beside him. The events of the previous night rushed back, and for a moment, she wondered if it had all been a strange dream. But the faint groan from the stranger as he stirred confirmed otherwise. Timmy was already up, clinking cereal bowls in the kitchen. He peeked into the living room, his curious eyes darting between Emily and the stranger. "Is he okay now?" Timmy whispered, balancing a spoon on the edge of his bowl. Emily rubbed her temples. "I think so, but I'm not sure. He needs rest." The man on the couch shifted, his face contorted with pain. He opened his eyes slowly, and for the first time, Emily noticed their startling clarity, a piercing gray that seemed to carry an untold weight. He glanced around, taking in the modest room with its mismatched furniture, worn carpet, and the faint scent of coffee. "You're awake," Emily said, leaning forward. "How do you feel?" "Like I got run over by a train," he muttered, his voice hoarse but laced with a dry humor that surprised her. "Where am I?" "My house," Emily replied bluntly. "You refused to go to a hospital, so here you are." He propped himself up slightly, wincing as he moved his injured leg. I owe you for this." Emily waved him off. "Save it. I couldn't just leave you out there. But you've got some explaining to do. Who are you, and why were you so desperate to avoid the hospital or the police?" He hesitated, his gaze flicking toward Timmy, who was now standing in the doorway, cereal bowl in hand, watching the exchange like it was his favorite TV drama. The man's lips pressed into a thin line before he sighed and leaned back against the cushions. "My name's Daniel," he said finally, his voice cautious. "I was traveling through when things went wrong." "Things went wrong?" Emily raised an eyebrow. "That's all you've got? You were driving through town in a suit that costs more than my yearly rent, crash your car, and nearly die, and all you'll say is, 'Things went wrong'?" Daniel's jaw tightened, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. "It's not safe for me to say more. The less you know, the better." Emily crossed her arms. "Oh, great. A man of mystery. That's exactly what I needed in my already complicated life." Timmy snorted, clearly amused. "He sounds like one of those guys from Mom's books." "Timmy." Emily shot him a warning look, and he scampered back to the kitchen, though she could still hear him giggling. Daniel's lips twitched into what might have been a smile, but it faded quickly. "Look, I know this is inconvenient for you, but I promise, I'll be out of your hair as soon as I can walk." Emily studied him for a moment. His tone was firm, almost commanding, but there was something vulnerable in his expression, a flicker of unease he couldn't quite hide. "You're not exactly in any shape to be making promises," she said. "And frankly, I'm not sure I trust you. But I've already gone this far, so you're stuck with me for now. Just, don't make me regret it." He nodded, seemingly relieved, and closed his eyes again. Emily sighed and headed into the kitchen, where Timmy was perched on a stool, swinging his legs. "Is he a bad guy?" Timmy asked, his voice small. "I don't think so," Emily said, though she wasn't entirely sure. "He's just in trouble. But we're going to help him, okay? That's what we do." Timmy nodded solemnly, as if she'd just handed him a sacred duty. The day passed in a strange blur. Emily kept busy tending to Daniel's injuries, running errands, and trying to keep Timmy entertained. But her mind kept drifting back to the stranger on her couch. His guarded demeanor, the expensive watch still on his wrist, the way he flinched every time she mentioned calling for help, it all added up to a mystery she couldn't ignore. That evening, as she prepared a simple dinner of soup and bread, Daniel spoke for the first time since their earlier conversation. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice carrying a sincerity that surprised her. "For what?" Emily asked, turning to face him. "For not asking too many questions," he admitted, his gaze focused on the floor. "Most people wouldn't have done what you did." Emily set down the ladle and crossed her arms. "Don't thank me just yet. I still want answers. I'm not stupid, Daniel. You're not just some businessman passing through, are you?" His eyes met hers, and for a moment, she thought he might actually tell her the truth. But then he shook his head. "It's better if you don't know." Emily sighed, frustrated but unwilling to push him further. She handed him a bowl of soup and sat down across from him. "Fine. Keep your secrets," she said. "But let me make one thing clear. Whatever mess you're in, it doesn't come near my brother. Got it?" Daniel nodded. "Got it." As they ate in silence, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped into something far bigger than herself. Later that night, when the house was quiet and Timmy was fast asleep, Emily sat by the window, staring out at the darkened street. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of questions with no answers. Who was Daniel, really? What was he running from? And why did she feel like she'd just opened a door she couldn't close? She didn't have long to ponder. A sharp knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. Her heart leapt into her throat as she glanced toward the living room, where Daniel was now sitting upright, his face pale. "Are you expecting someone?" he asked, his voice low and tense. "No," Emily whispered, moving toward the door. Through the peephole, she saw a man in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. Her stomach churned with unease. "Don't open it," Daniel said urgently, his voice sharp. Emily hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. The man knocked again, more forcefully this time. "Miss Thompson," he called out, his tone calm but firm. "We know you're in there. We just want to talk." Emily's blood ran cold. How did he know her name? She turned to Daniel, her voice barely a whisper. "Who are they?" Daniel's face was grim. "Trouble." Before she could respond, the man outside spoke again. "You're harboring someone very important to us," he said. "Hand him over, and we won't cause any trouble." Emily's hands clenched into fists. She didn't know who these people were or what they wanted, but one thing was clear, they weren't here to talk. Daniel struggled to stand, his injuries making it difficult. "Listen to me," he said urgently. "Don't let them in. Whatever happens, don't trust them." Emily's mind raced. She didn't know who to trust, but one thing was certain, her quiet life in Clearwater had just been turned upside down. Emily's heart hammered in her chest as she stood frozen by the door. The man outside knocked again, his calm but commanding voice sending chills down her spine. "Miss Thompson," he called out, his tone patient yet firm, "you're putting yourself in unnecessary danger by refusing to cooperate. Let's not escalate this." She turned toward Daniel, who was struggling to stay upright despite the pain etched across his face. His gray eyes bore into hers with a fierce urgency. "Don't open it," he whispered, his voice hoarse but adamant. "They're not who they say they are. You have to trust me." Emily clenched her fists, torn between the stranger's cryptic warning and the ominous presence outside her door. Every instinct screamed at her to protect her brother, who was still asleep in the back room. Timmy didn't deserve to get caught up in whatever nightmare had just arrived on their doorstep. "Who are they?" she hissed, keeping her voice low. Daniel hesitated, wincing as he shifted his weight. "People who think they own everything and everyone. If they take me, I'm as good as dead. And if you let them in, they won't leave you or your brother out of this." The knock came again, harder this time, rattling the flimsy door on its hinges. "We're losing patience," the man outside warned. Don't make us come in ourselves. Panic surged through Emily, but she forced herself to think. Her house was small, with only one entrance and no back door. If they forced their way in, there'd be nowhere to hide. She glanced at Daniel, who was leaning heavily on the armrest, his face pale but his expression resolute. "Can you stand?" she asked urgently. "Barely," he admitted, gripping the couch for support. "Then we have to stall," she muttered, her mind racing. Taking a deep breath, Emily approached the door, careful not to make a sound. She pressed her hand against the wood and spoke loud enough to be heard. "What do you want with him?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "That's not your concern," the man replied, his tone cold. "He's stolen something valuable, and we're here to retrieve it. Hand him over, and you'll be left alone." Emily glanced back at Daniel, whose jaw tightened at the accusation. "They're lying," he said quietly. "Of course they are," Emily muttered under her breath. The man outside, apparently losing patience, barked another command. "You have 30 seconds to open this door, or we're coming in." Fear coursed through Emily as she scrambled for a plan. Her eyes darted to the phone on the counter, but she quickly dismissed the idea. Calling the police might escalate things further, especially if Daniel's warning was true. Instead, she turned back to him. "Is there anything you're not telling me? Something that might help us get out of this?" Daniel hesitated, his expression conflicted. "I didn't steal anything," he said finally, his voice steady. "But I have something they want, something I wasn't supposed to find." Emily's stomach churned. "And what exactly is that?" He reached into the inner pocket of his tattered suit jacket and pulled out a small, sleek USB drive. It gleamed faintly in the dim light, deceptively simple yet somehow ominous. "This," he said, holding it up. "It's a dossier. Evidence of corruption, embezzlement, and things that would destroy some very powerful people if they ever saw the light of day. I was supposed to deliver it to someone who could expose them, but," he trailed off, wincing. "But they found you first," Emily finished, her voice grim. Daniel nodded. "And now they think you're helping me. That makes you a target too." The reality of her situation hit her like a blow to the chest. She'd gone from worrying about overdue bills and diner shifts to being hunted by dangerous people with God knows what resources at their disposal. "I need time," she whispered to herself, her mind racing for a solution. The man outside interrupted her thoughts with a final ultimatum. "This is your last chance. Open the door, or we'll break it down." Emily turned to Daniel. "Can you walk if I help you?" "I'll manage," he said, though the strain in his voice told her otherwise. Grabbing his arm, she pulled him to his feet. His weight leaned heavily on her, but she braced herself and guided him toward the kitchen. She glanced around desperately, her eyes landing on the pantry door. "Get in," she whispered, opening it. Daniel frowned. "You think hiding me will work?" "It's not a long-term plan," she admitted. "But it'll buy us a few seconds to figure something out." Reluctantly, he stepped into the small pantry, crouching awkwardly to fit. Emily closed the door just as the first loud thud echoed through the house. "They're breaking it down," she muttered, her pulse racing. Without thinking, she grabbed a heavy frying pan from the stove and held it in both hands, her knuckles white. The door gave way with a final, splintering crack, and two men in dark suits stepped inside. They were tall and imposing, their cold eyes scanning the room before landing on Emily. "Where is he?" the first man demanded, his voice devoid of emotion. Emily squared her shoulders, clutching the pan tightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." The second man smirked. "Don't play dumb. We know he's here." Before she could respond, Timmy's voice rang out from behind them. "Hey! Leave my sister alone." Emily's heart sank as she saw Timmy standing in the hallway, clutching a baseball bat that looked comically large in his small hands. "Timmy, get back," she shouted, panic lacing her voice. One of the men turned toward Timmy, a predatory grin spreading across his face. Looks like we've got ourselves a brave little hero. Something inside Emily snapped. Without thinking, she swung the frying pan with all her strength, the heavy metal colliding with the man's head. He stumbled forward, dazed, and she didn't give him a chance to recover. "Run, Timmy," she screamed, her voice trembling with both fear and determination. Timmy hesitated for a split second before bolting toward the back room. The second man lunged toward Emily, but she ducked, swinging the pan again and narrowly missing his arm. The first man, now furious, lunged for her, pinning her against the wall. The frying pan slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor. "Enough games," he growled, his grip tightening around her wrist. Before he could do anything more, a sudden crash from the pantry drew everyone's attention. Daniel burst out, wielding a broomstick like a makeshift weapon. Despite his injuries, he moved with surprising speed, jabbing the stick into the first man's side and sending him stumbling backward. The second man turned toward Daniel, but Emily seized the opportunity. She grabbed the fallen frying pan and swung it again, striking the second man square in the back. He let out a grunt of pain before crumpling to the floor. For a moment, the room was eerily quiet except for the sound of their labored breathing. Daniel leaned against the counter, his face pale and glistening with sweat. "We need to go," he said, his voice strained. "They won't be down for long." Emily nodded, her mind racing. "Timmy, grab your coat." Her brother appeared a moment later, wide-eyed but determined. "Are we leaving?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Right now." Grabbing the USB drive from the counter, Daniel stuffed it back into his pocket. Emily didn't have time to question him further. Together, the three of them slipped out the back door and into the night, the cold air biting at their skin. As they disappeared into the shadows, Emily's mind swirled with questions, fear, and an unshakable sense that their lives would never be the same again. The cold night air bit into Emily's skin as she half-dragged, half-supported Daniel through the narrow alleyways behind her house. Timmy followed closely, his small feet padding silently on the uneven ground, his wide eyes darting around nervously. The adrenaline coursing through her veins was the only thing keeping Emily moving. She had no plan, no destination, only the desperate need to get as far away as possible. Behind them, faint noises carried on the wind, the sound of splintered wood crunching underfoot and muffled voices. The men had regained consciousness, and it was only a matter of time before they came after them. Daniel groaned softly, his weight leaning more heavily on Emily. "I'm slowing you down," he muttered, his voice weak. "You need to leave me." "Don't be ridiculous," Emily snapped, her breath visible in the frigid air. "We're not leaving you." Timmy chimed in, his voice trembling but resolute. "Yeah, we're in this together now." Daniel's lips twitched into the faintest semblance of a smile, but it vanished just as quickly. He winced as they rounded a corner, his injured leg dragging slightly. "Where are we even going?" he asked, glancing around at the maze of alleys and dimly lit backstreets. Emily hesitated, her mind racing. They couldn't go to a hotel, those men were clearly resourceful enough to find them. The diner was out of the question, as was any public space where they could be cornered. Then, like a bolt of lightning, an idea struck her. "We're going to Mr. Grady's place," she said, picking up the pace. "Who's that?" Daniel asked, his voice skeptical. "An old family friend," Emily replied. "He lives on the edge of town, runs a repair shop. He's the last person anyone would suspect, and he won't ask questions." Timmy perked up. "He has that big garage. It's like a fortress." Daniel didn't protest, though his expression betrayed his doubts. Emily prayed she was right about Grady. The man had been a steady presence in her life when her parents were alive, always willing to lend a hand when things got tough. She just hoped he'd extend that same generosity now. They moved as quickly as they could, the sound of their pursuers growing fainter as they put distance between themselves and the house. The streets grew quieter, the soft hum of traffic giving way to the occasional rustle of leaves or bark of a distant dog. By the time they reached Grady's property, Daniel was nearly unconscious, his head lolling against Emily's shoulder. She banged on the garage door with the flat of her hand, her urgency overriding any politeness. "Grady!" "It's Emily," she called out, her voice strained. For a few agonizing seconds, there was no response. Then, with a loud metallic groan, the garage door began to roll up, revealing a grizzled man in his late 60s. His face was weathered, his gray beard neatly trimmed, and his sharp eyes immediately took in the scene before him. "Emily?" "What in the world?" Grady started, but she cut him off. "I'll explain everything later," she said quickly. "We need a place to lay low." "Please, Grady. It's an emergency." Grady's gaze shifted to Daniel, who was barely conscious, and then to Timmy, who was clutching his sister's hand tightly. Without another word, Grady stepped aside and motioned them in. The garage was spacious and cluttered, filled with tools, spare parts, and the faint smell of motor oil. Emily helped Daniel onto an old couch in the corner, where he collapsed with a groan. Grady crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "You're in some kind of trouble, aren't you?" Emily nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "The worst kind. But I promise, we didn't do anything wrong." Grady's eyes softened slightly. "I've known you long enough to believe that. But if you're running from someone, they're bound to come looking. You sure you want to bring that kind of heat here?" "I wouldn't have come if I had any other choice," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Grady sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "All right. You can stay for now. But you'll need to tell me what's going on." Emily glanced at Timmy, who was hovering near the couch, watching Daniel with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Timmy, can you get Daniel some water?" she asked gently. Timmy nodded and darted off toward the small kitchenette in the corner of the garage. Once he was out of earshot, Emily turned back to Grady and lowered her voice. "The man on the couch, his name is Daniel. He's in trouble with some very dangerous people. They're after something he has, and now they think we're involved." Grady raised an eyebrow. "What's he got that's so important?" Emily hesitated, debating how much to reveal. Finally, she pulled the USB drive from her pocket and held it up. "This," she said. "He says it's evidence. Something that could expose corruption and take down powerful people." Grady's eyes narrowed as he studied the small device. "And these people will do anything to get it back, won't they?" Emily nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Grady sighed again, his shoulders sagging. "Well, you've certainly brought me a hell of a mess. But I've never turned my back on family, and I'm not about to start now. You can stay here until we figure out what to do next." Relief flooded through Emily, and she reached out to squeeze Grady's arm. "Thank you. I don't know what we'd do without you." Grady gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Let's just hope it doesn't come to that." Timmy returned with a glass of water, and Emily helped Daniel take a few small sips. His color was still pale, but he seemed a bit more coherent. "Where are we?" he asked groggily. "Safe," Emily said firmly. "At least for now." Daniel's eyes flicked toward Grady, who nodded in acknowledgement. "You've got good people looking out for you," Grady said. "Don't waste it." Daniel's expression was unreadable, but he muttered a quiet, "Thank you," before closing his eyes again. As the night wore on, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. She sat by the window, keeping watch as Timmy slept curled up in a blanket and Daniel drifted in and out of consciousness. Grady worked quietly at his workbench, occasionally glancing over at her with a look of quiet concern. Somewhere out there, those men were still searching. And Emily knew it was only a matter of time before they found them. But for now, they had a chance to regroup, to think, to plan. And Emily was determined to do whatever it took to protect her brother, Daniel, and the fragile sense of safety they'd found in the middle of the storm. The morning came too soon, bringing with it a gray, overcast sky that seemed to press heavily on the world outside. Emily sat stiffly by the garage window, her eyes red from a sleepless night. Every sound, the creak of a shifting wall, the distant growl of a passing car, sent a jolt of anxiety through her. She couldn't shake the feeling that danger was creeping closer, inch by inch, with every passing second. Daniel stirred on the couch, his movements slow and pained. Emily turned toward him as he blinked awake, his face still pale but his eyes more alert than they had been the night before. She handed him a mug of instant coffee Grady had brewed, and he accepted it with a faint nod of gratitude. "How's the leg?" Emily asked softly, sitting on the edge of the couch. Daniel shifted, grimacing. "It's not great, but I'll live. Thanks for not leaving me behind last night." "Don't mention it," Emily said, brushing off his gratitude. "We're not out of the woods yet." As if on cue, Grady appeared from the far side of the garage, wiping his hands on an oily rag. His expression was grim. "I've been thinking," he said, leaning against his workbench. "If those guys are as dangerous as you say, it won't be long before they start sniffing around here. We need to get ahead of them." Daniel glanced at him, his brow furrowing. "You mean run?" Grady shook his head. "Running won't solve anything, not if they're as connected as I think. No, we need to hit back. Make it so they're too busy dealing with their own mess to come after you." Emily looked at Grady in surprise. "What are you suggesting?" Grady gestured toward the USB drive still clutched in Emily's hand. "That thing you've got, it's leverage. You said it has evidence on it, right? Corruption, embezzlement, the works?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, but it's useless if we can't get it into the right hands. And trust me, the people I was supposed to deliver it to, they're either compromised or too scared to act now." Grady's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing in thought. "Then we find someone else. Someone who can make noise with this. Journalists, whistleblower groups, anyone who has the guts to stand up to these bastards. But we've got to move fast. The longer we sit here, the more time they have to track us." Emily felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her chest. The idea of going on the offensive was terrifying, but she couldn't deny the logic in Grady's words. They couldn't keep running forever. Timmy, who had been sitting quietly in the corner drawing on a scrap of paper, suddenly looked up. "What if they find us before we do anything?" he asked, his voice small but steady. Emily's heart ached at the fear in his eyes, but she forced herself to smile reassuringly. "They won't," she said, more to convince herself than him. "We'll stay one step ahead." Grady walked over to an old, dusty cabinet and rummaged through its contents. After a few moments, he pulled out a road atlas and a battered laptop. "First things first," he said, spreading the atlas out on the workbench. "We need a location where we can work without being interrupted. I've got a friend about an hour outside town, owns an old hunting cabin in the woods. It's remote enough that we'll have some breathing room." Emily glanced at Daniel, who gave a weak nod. "Sounds like our best shot," he said. Grady powered up the laptop, its screen flickering to life with a low hum. "While you're packing up, I'll start digging. If we're going to blow this thing wide open, we'll need more than just the drive. Names, connections, timelines, we've got to connect the dots so the whole thing makes sense to whoever we hand it off to." Emily stood and began gathering what little they had. Timmy packed his small backpack with snacks and his favorite book, while Daniel sat on the couch, pulling himself together with visible effort. By the time they were ready to leave, the sky had grown darker, and the first droplets of rain began tapping against the garage roof. Grady loaded them into his old pickup truck, which groaned and sputtered to life as he turned the key. The drive was tense and silent, the winding back road stretching endlessly before them. Emily kept glancing out the window, her nerves on edge. Every passing car felt like a potential threat, every shadow a hiding place for the men who had invaded her home. When they finally arrived at the cabin, the isolation was almost unnerving. Surrounded by thick trees and overgrown brush, the small wooden structure looked like something out of a survivalist's dream. Grady unlocked the door and ushered them inside, lighting a few kerosene lamps to chase away the gloom. "This'll do," he said, setting the laptop on a rickety table. "Now let's get to work." Over the next few hours, Grady and Daniel pored over the contents of the USB drive, their expressions growing darker with each discovery. Emily hovered nearby, feeling both frustrated and helpless. She hated not knowing the full extent of what they were dealing with, but she also knew that asking too many questions would slow them down. Timmy, sensing the tension, stayed close to Emily, his small hand clutching hers. "Is it bad?" he whispered. Emily hesitated before answering. "It's complicated," she said finally. "But we'll figure it out." As night fell, the atmosphere in the cabin grew heavier. Grady leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "This is worse than I thought," he said grimly. "Bribes, offshore accounts, illegal surveillance, they've got their fingers in everything." Daniel nodded, his expression hard. "And they'll stop at nothing to keep it hidden." Emily swallowed hard, the weight of their situation pressing down on her. "So what do we do now?" Grady stood, cracking his knuckles. "We make some calls. I know a guy who used to work for an independent news outlet. He's a bit of a wild card, but he hates corruption more than he likes playing it safe. If anyone can blow this thing open, it's him." Daniel frowned. "And what if they intercept us before we get the information out?" Grady's eyes darkened. "Then we make sure they regret it." The resolve in his voice sent a chill down Emily's spine, but it also gave her a strange sense of reassurance. They weren't alone in this fight, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. As the rain continued to fall outside, Emily sat by the window, keeping watch once again. She knew the road ahead would be treacherous, but she also knew that they couldn't turn back. Somewhere out there, powerful people were scrambling to cover their tracks, to silence anyone who threatened their empire. But Emily was determined. They had the truth on their side, and she wouldn't let fear stop her from fighting for it. In the dim light of the cabin, as Grady and Daniel prepared for the next step in their plan, Emily tightened her grip on the frying pan she'd brought from home. It wasn't much, but it was a reminder of her resolve, of the ordinary girl who had stepped into an extraordinary battle. And she wasn't going to let them win. The following morning, a pale sun struggled to pierce through the lingering rainclouds as Emily woke to the faint sound of voices. Her body ached from the hard cot Grady had set up for her, but she forced herself up, instinctively scanning the cabin to make sure everyone was still there. Timmy was still asleep, curled up under a thick quilt on the couch, and Daniel sat at the makeshift workstation with Grady. Their voices were low, but the urgency in their tone made it clear that something had changed. Emily joined them, her footsteps light on the creaking floor. Grady glanced up, his face etched with exhaustion and something that looked like excitement. Daniel, on the other hand, looked grim, his lips pressed into a thin line. "What's going on?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Grady leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. "We made contact," he said. "My guy, Martin, he's willing to meet. He's got connections with a group of whistleblowers that operate outside mainstream media. If anyone can get this story out, it's them." Emily felt a surge of hope, but it was immediately tempered by Daniel's expression. "So why do you look like you've just heard bad news?" she asked him. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because they've stepped up their efforts. Grady was monitoring some chatter last night, and it looks like they've locked down the town. Roadblocks, unmarked vehicles, it's only a matter of time before they figure out where we are. Emily's stomach dropped. So what do we do? We move, Grady said firmly. We don't have a choice. Martin's agreed to meet us halfway, but it's going to be risky. If these guys are as serious as they seem, they'll be watching every main road. Daniel pulled up a map on the laptop, his finger tracing a route through a series of back roads and forest trails. This is the best path, he said. It's not perfect, but it'll give us the best chance of slipping past them. Emily studied the map, her heart pounding. It was one thing to hide out in the cabin, but the idea of venturing out into the open felt like stepping into a lion's den. Still, they didn't have a choice. Staying put would only make them sitting ducks. Grady began packing immediately, throwing essentials into a duffel bag, food, water, a first aid kit, and a few tools that could double as weapons if necessary. Emily woke Timmy gently, explaining the plan in the calmest voice she could muster. The boy nodded, his face pale but resolute. By the time they loaded into Grady's truck, the sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The air was thick with tension as Grady navigated the narrow dirt road leading away from the cabin. The truck's engine rumbled softly, the only sound breaking the heavy silence. Emily kept her eyes fixed on the passing trees, her hand resting protectively on Timmy's shoulder. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, though logic told her that was impossible this deep in the woods. Still, her nerves were on edge, every muscle in her body coiled like a spring. After nearly an hour of winding through the forest, Grady brought the truck to a halt. "This is as far as we go by vehicle," he said. "The meeting spot is about a mile from here. We'll go the rest of the way on foot." Daniel groaned softly, clearly dreading the trek with his injured leg, but he nodded in agreement. They disembarked, moving quickly to gather their things. Grady led the way, his movements sure and confident, while Emily stayed close to Timmy, keeping a watchful eye on the boy. Daniel brought up the rear, his limp pronounced but his determination unwavering. The forest was eerily quiet, the muffled crunch of their footsteps the only sound. Emily's mind raced with possibilities. What if Martin was compromised? What if this was a trap? She pushed the thoughts aside, focusing instead on putting one foot in front of the other. When they finally reached the clearing, Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. Martin was already there, leaning against a weathered jeep with a cigarette dangling from his lips. He was a wiry man with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He gave them a curt nod as they approached. "You must be Emily," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. "And you," he added, looking at Daniel, "are the man with the evidence." Daniel nodded, pulling the USB drive from his pocket. "It's all here," he said. "Everything they've tried to bury." Martin took the drive, turning it over in his hand. "You have no idea what kind of firestorm this is going to ignite," he said. "If this gets out, it'll bring down more than just a few powerful people. It could unravel an entire network." "Good," Emily said fiercely. "That's exactly what we want." Martin gave her a small, approving smile. "I like your spirit," he said. "But you should know, it's not going to be easy. Once this hits, they'll come after you with everything they've got. You're about to become public enemy number one." Emily glanced at Timmy, who was standing silently by her side, his hand gripping hers tightly. "We've already come this far," she said. "We're not backing down now." Martin nodded, pocketing the USB drive. "All right. I'll get this to the right people. But you need to disappear, at least for a while. They'll be looking for you, and if they find you before this goes live." "We know the risks," Grady said, his voice steady. "We'll handle it." Martin hesitated, then reached into the back of his jeep and pulled out a small satchel. "This has some cash and a couple of burner phones. Use them sparingly. And whatever you do, stay off the grid. Emily took the bag, her hands trembling slightly. Thank you, she said. For helping us. Martin gave her a solemn nod. Thank me when it's over, he said. If we all make it out of this in one piece. With that, he climbed into his jeep and drove off, leaving them alone in the clearing. Emily watched until the vehicle disappeared into the trees, then turned to the others. What now? She asked, her voice heavy with exhaustion. Grady slung his bag over his shoulder. Now we keep moving, he said. There's a safe house a few towns over. It's not much, but it'll buy us some time. As they made their way back into the forest, Emily felt a strange mix of emotions, relief that the evidence was finally in the right hands, fear of what lay ahead, and a deep sense of determination. They had taken the first step in a long and dangerous journey, but there was no turning back now. For the first time in days, Emily allowed herself a small glimmer of hope. They had done something important, something that could change the course of countless lives. And no matter what came next, she knew they had made the right choice.